Hello! Welcome to GM Chat, where a couple old GMs sit around and talk about shit. That's pretty much the
And we can
best.
definitely do that.
Yep. That's probably the best description of the show yet. Yep. So, I'm Jeff. I'm the game master for Lands of Agathan on Tuesday nights.
I am Mike, and I am GM all the rest of the time.
Yeah, pretty much. So, this week we decided we were going to talk about some of our favorite game mechanics, but we were also going to talk about the times when the game mechanics, for whatever reason, just didn't work for us, and how we ended up with house rules. Because every game's got them. Every game runs into something that they're like, this just doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't work. So let's figure out how to make it work for us. And
So I'm going to just say this. There's probably, since the inception of Dungeons and Dragons and dice rolling and so forth, probably no rule that has been homespun more than stat rolling.
yep.
There's been so many different iterations of that. Now, back in the old school days, you rolled 3 die 6, and that's what you got in order.
Yes, and the order
And
at
that's what
that
determined
point
what class.
the order at that point was different than the order it is now. The order at that point was strength, intelligence, wisdom, dexterity, constitution, charisma.
Yes.
And you rolled them in that order, and whatever
So
you got, that's what you got.
that's what you got.
Ended
Oh,
up ended
and
up with a
the
3
old
in
school rules.
intelligence? Oh well, get ready to play a dumb character.
Yes. And um, back in them days, in those editions, you didn't raise stats.
No.
They didn't go up. That was just the character.
Yep. I mean, you could raise them with
I can
magic.
remember having to dump a character because they just didn't have good enough stats to adventure with,
Yep.
and have to roll another one.
Yep.
But
I
those
can
rules have been revamped and redone.
I can
So,
remember those days. You get so excited. You get 5 decent stats in a row, and you're like, this is going to be the greatest character ever. And then roll a 1 and a 2 and a 1.
yeah.
And be like,
Well, yeah. Well, if I had 5 great stats back in those days, I wouldn't care if I had 3 for the last stat. I'd take the 5 great ones. I can work with that.
yeah.
But yeah, so I think that's probably the one most revamped. In fact, so much so, some of the later iterations of D&D have adopted alternate methods for stat rolling.
Yeah, like the 4d6 dropped the lowest. That's canon now.
Right. Yeah. Yep.
And I know we used to go, depending on what the game was, we would use that, but go either reroll 1s or sometimes reroll 1s and 2s.
Yes.
So the lowest
Depending
stat,
on
the lowest stat you could possibly have would be a 6.
it would depend on
Or no, a 9.
how
Yeah.
powerful the campaign you wanted. If you were playing, superhuman characters, then that's the route you would go.
Yep.
For sure. But
Characters that were
and then
predestined for greatness.
right. And then there's the point buy system, and that's seen a few different kinds of iterations, but D&D has also adopted that.
Yep. Yeah, that,
which is a little more
to my memory,
typical.
I think the first time I saw a point buy system was White Wolf. I don't really remember it before that.
Yep.
But
Yeah, I don't recall it before that, but yeah, they're the first I remember.
and
Sort of a point by. Yeah.
again, I will say for White Wolf, it works great. I mean that
Yeah.
system has stood the test of
Hmm.
time and it works. I don't so much like it for D&D.
Um, yeah, for D&D, I think it's just for quick rolls,
Yeah.
rolling up a quick character and, you know, but some people, that's exclusively how they do it in their games.
Yeah.
There are some DMs that, no, this is how many points you get. This is what it takes. This is what you do. Make your stats. Put them where you want, you know.
Yep. I
Yeah,
will say
it's not really for me. I like the fun of just kind of seeing what the dice give you.
yeah. And with the point buy system, the one thing I don't like is the systems where it's like, okay, everybody starts at 10, you get X points, but if you get your score above this level, it costs 2 points to raise it another point, and
Yeah.
above this level it costs 3 points. Now, just figure out how many points you want to give somebody and say, okay, split this up amongst your stats. Don't make extra math. That's not fun for anybody but mathematicians.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to say much about math and homebrew systems. So,
Yeah.
but so yeah, I think dice rolling methods for attributes is probably the first one. So, what's your earliest recollection of having to look at the rules and say, I can do better?
Probably for me, it was coming out of first edition and getting into second. And that was, I don't think I ever really played first edition, but I wrote up characters and, I understood the rules and I ran like sample combats just to see how it all worked. But when we got into second edition, that was the first time I got to play, and I've been trying all morning to remember what I was reading that gave me this idea, and I cannot recall because this was a long time ago. But I was reading a series of novels where the wizards in the world spent all their free time studying formula, studying all the various magical formulas. But they had an internal reservoir of magic, and they could use it via those different formulas, and depending on the formula, depended on how much power you had to put into it. And when the reservoir was gone, they were done for the day. And
Right.
I looked at the spell memorization system in second edition and went, yeah, that just doesn't make any sense to me. That idea that, you have to figure out ahead of time what you're going to need for the day. As anybody who's ever left the house knows, you can make all the plans you want. There's a famous general, I don't remember who, but somebody said, no plan survives the first encounter.
Right.
And that's pretty much true.
Uh-huh.
And I thought, that was kind of an unfair handicap, because if you were a martial class, when a situation came up, you could choose which of your weapons you wanted to pull out and use. But the wizards and the clerics had to think ahead and guess at what was
Right.
going to be useful. And I went, nope, that doesn't work for me. And so I devised a spell point system, one that was easy.
Right.
If you were a 5th level wizard, you got 3 first level spells, 2 second level spells, and 1 third level spell. That meant 3 and 4 and 3, you had 10 spell points. and it cost a spell
Right.
point per level of the spell to cast.
Right.
And so when you walked out for the day, all the spells that you knew, you had the formulas for them in your head. That's what the wizards did. That's why they had to study, was to keep those formulas fresh in their mind. But then
Right.
they get into an encounter and go, oh, what spell do I know that would be appropriate for this? This one. It's second level. All right, I'm going to pull that formula out of my head, channel 2 points of spell energy into it, and cast the spell. And that worked. It's been modified periodically. One of the things that I first did was back in second and third edition, you would get bonus spells depending on your intelligence or your wisdom or your charisma or whatever stat was being used. So I factored those in as bonus spell points. If you were really, really, really smart, it meant that your brain was capable of handling a little bit more than somebody with an average intelligence. And then the last modification I made was I started looking at Constitution and thinking, well, okay, if you've got, a con bonus of 3, you get an extra 3 hit points every level. So if you've got a cleric with a wisdom of 3, why shouldn't the cleric get 3 extra spell points per level? And that pretty much finished my spell point system. And what's interesting is that in second edition, I worried, later on that it was making, wizards a little overpowered. And then third edition came along with all the metamagic feats. And I basically went, oh, okay, well, if it says you have to use something 4 spell levels higher, then it adds 4 spell points to the casting of that spell. And you know what? I'm in a campaign right now. There's a 13th level wizard running around with 140 some odd spell points or something like that. And with all of the metamagic, she can almost completely exhaust herself in 4 spells.
Ooh.
Yeah. Because of all of the adds for all of the different metamagic feats. Now, these are going to be 4 exceptionally heinous spells.
Right.
But when she's done, she's going to be, casting first and second level spells for the rest of the day until she can rest. And that made me feel a little better about the balance issues because, you've got X amount of energy. If you want to throw it and be, godly, that's great, but you aren't going to be able to do it many times.
And there are certain circumstances where you got to throw the big stuff.
Yes.
You know?
And this lets them do that.
Right. Now you found that 5th edition, that system isn't really conducive.
Well,
Or maybe conducive isn't the right word. Maybe it's sort of
well, 5th edition
outdated.
made it obsolete.
Yeah.
3rd edition came close. The system worked perfectly in 2nd edition. Excuse me. When 3rd edition came out was the first time we got the sorcerer class.
Right.
And that was my biggest headache throughout all of playing 3rd edition was the spell point system made the sorcerer class useless.
Yeah.
And I never did figure out a fix for that, not that I was satisfied with. But, there wasn't the clerical equivalent of a sorcerer. There wasn't the bardic equivalent of a sorcerer. So I decided spell point system better than just relying on sorcerers for that kind of mechanic. But in 5th edition, you've got so many little tweaks built into the rules.
Right.
The ability for spells to increase in power depending on what spell slot you use to cast them.
Yes.
The ability to cast a spell at a higher level. So if you're casting Fireball and you're out of 3rd level slots, you can cast it at 5th level if you've got 5th level spells.
Sure.
So you can that sort of goes back to the idea of letting the mages choose how to use their power appropriately to a situation.
Hmm.
And cantrips. The fact that you've got something that doesn't cost any slots or any spell energy at all, just a basic sort of grunt level spell, but you can do it whenever you want.
Right.
That combined with the tweaks to how that slot system works was the first nail in the coffin. The second nail in the coffin was sorcerers and warlocks and bards, because that is essentially a stripped down version of the spell point system. It's here's how
Right.
many spells you know, here's how many spells you can cast per day.
That's it.
That's it.
Yep.
I
And they managed to equalize each class to make it its own thing. Like with sorcerers, yeah, you got this X many spell slots you can cast whatever you need to cast. But now you get sorcerer points that you can purchase new spell slots with if you have them available.
Yep.
So you can cast again. So each class kind of has its own little fun thing. With warlocks, they can take a short rest and get their spells back,
Yeah.
their slots.
But that's good because the slots they get are minuscule.
Sure, but it works.
Yep.
It's just a good system. So every type of caster kind of has their own brand of
Yeah.
casting.
Yeah. And so, I had originally I was looking just before we started at some notes that I had written on house rules for 5th edition, and these were written up back when I was first trying to run 5th. And it's clear, looking back on it now, that I really didn't understand a lot of how 5th worked at that point, because I was just starting with the system. Because there's some rules on there now that I'm like, no, no. Um, the one thing that I'm looking at now that I'm thinking, okay, well, I don't know. The classes that have spells known, allowing one of those classes to add their attribute modifier to that number.
Mm-hmm.
Or not spells known, but spells that you can cast per day.
Right, right.
Just saying, so, if you're a warlock with a charisma of 20, you can cast 5 more spells a day than someone with a charisma of 10. Now, that one I just remembered, and I'm still tossing around in my head. I don't know that I've ever actually used that one. So, I don't know if that will remain a house rule for me or not. I got to think about it.
So I have one where there's a rule that you can interpret a certain way that was probably never intended to be explained. However, you
Yeah.
did. And I did that with villains and vigilantes, which has a point by or a power point system
Yep.
for your powers.
Mm-hmm.
And every time you use your power, it expends X amount of power points to
Right.
use it.
Like a power blast uses what, 2?
Power Blast uses 1.
Uses 1. Okay.
But
And it's a
yeah, some of the
D20.
others,
It's a D20 plus your damage mod.
yes.
Yeah.
However, that's not how it reads, and this is where I'm making my point. What it said is you get, for 1 point of power, you get to roll 1d20 damage. Now, it doesn't say specifically you got 1d20 for damage, and that's it. It just says for every power point you spend, you get to roll 1d20 for damage. So I kind of incorporated in that, which I'm sure was not the intent by rules, that if you wanted to spend 10 power points, you could roll 10 die 20 damage.
Yep. That kind of goes back to the same philosophy as my spell point system.
Right.
That you've got this power pool to pull from, and you
Right.
can choose how much power to expend.
But with the system that I use, because damages were so high, because one of my other complete overhauls was the HTH, or the hand-to-hand damage system, or strength. Where you're lifting hundreds of tons and doing 7 die 10 damage, which the math didn't quite work out with how much. For example, structure, they had a structure rating system where I think steel was 11, could take 11 points of damage per square inch. And so, if you got a character that's doing, say, 1 die 6 points of damage plus their damage modifier, which could easily be in excess of 10 points. Well, they're doing a minimum of 11 points of damage. Now, 1d6 isn't strong enough to, your strength, you're not strong enough to punch through a piece of 1-inch steel. I don't care how strong, how much damage you can do in the system. In real life, it didn't wash with me. And it was the other end of the spectrum with someone who could lift hundreds of tons of, weight. Like if you had the Hulk or something like that, and you're doing 7 die 10 points of damage, well, with 11 per square inch, that's less than 7 inches of steel.
Yeah.
And the Hulk, in actuality, could take it and rip it in half like a piece of paper. So it didn't quite wash. So I had to restructure all of it and completely revamp the damage point system and the HTH damage, the energy output damage, and the structural rating system, so that it all kind of worked itself out. And how I ended up doing that was, whatever the rating was, item rating for the structure, say steel again, was 11 per square inch. That's how much invulnerability it had. Or for those of you who remember damage reduction, that's how much damage it could withstand before it even took damage.
Right.
So you'd have to do 11 points of damage just to damage the steel itself. And so that kind of worked really well. But then, you had 11 points of damage. I made a mistake there. It wasn't a square inch of steel for 11. It was a cubic foot of steel could take 11 points of damage before being destroyed. That's why it was so crazy to me. So I made it an inch. That's what it was. So an 11 structure rating for an inch of steel, but it also had 11 points of invulnerability. That system seemed to work well for me, and especially for the higher damages that I ended up coming up with, and like the HTH system. Unfortunately, with the HTH system, you ended up having to get a bucket full of dice to roll if you had super strength.
Yes, I do remember that.
But while it was a little bit clunky, it was far more realistic, I thought. But so I guess it's what you want to do. But that was my big revamp and retooling of a game system.
Yeah. It was it was always interesting to me when you were playing something new and everything in the game was great, and then you ran across something that just broke the game for you.
Yes.
Crap. I had one. I had one in mind and I lost it. This is what happens when you're an old GM. You've been doing this way too long.
Yep. Hard drive's getting full.
Yep.
Memory's starting to wane.
Time to defrag. Oh, wait. I don't have access to do that. Crap. Now, here's a question. Have you ever played in someone else's game and had to deal with a house rule that you really didn't agree with?
Yeah, I don't know that I did. I know there's been a number of people who played in mine that just abhorred my house rules. But I don't recall. Maybe there is, but I can't remember off the top of my head. I've played with so many different people, but what about you?
Well, I've had disagreements, and kind of had to say, okay, well, if that's how you want to do it, that's how you want to do it. There's a game that I'm in currently that the DM decided that harm should have a saving throw in 3rd edition.
Harm?
Yeah. As read, you cast the spell on somebody, and they they lose all their hit points except 1d4.
Mm-hmm.
And in the player's handbook, it just says you cast the spell, they lose their hit points. And he was pretty adamant that whoever you're casting it on should get a saving throw, because he said otherwise it's just too powerful. Which goes back to the discussion we had in the first episode about the idea of being overpowered. As a DM, I would simply say, okay, that's fine. Just remember they can use it on you too.
Well, yeah. What level spell is that?
6th.
It's pretty high level spell.
5th or 6th.
Yeah, that's a pretty strong spell, but I think if a player surprised me with that, I would go ahead and allow it. But I would be prepared next time. Have something like a spell turning, or something like that, something to prevent them from casting the spell.
Right.
What's that one that they cast all the time? I can't remember.
Oh, they do get They do get a saving throw. Oh, maybe it was the fact that he was saying that there needed to be a roll to hit as well. Because usually the spells, at least in 3rd edition, it's either you have to roll to hit, or they get a save. Usually it's, if it's assumed that you're going to hit them, then they get a saving throw. So, yeah, and it is a 6th level cleric spell.
Yeah, that's a pretty high level spell.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, there's counterspell. There's ways to jack up the player. My personal favorite would be to spell turn. Cast it back at the caster.
Yeah.
And watch the look on their face. That would be just hilarious for me as a GM. But
yeah,
that's when you get players stomping out of away from the table, angry with you,
right.
and just laugh and revel.
Yeah, I remember one campaign. This was probably back in the 80s, where I wasn't running, I was a player, and somebody in the game asked if they could find a Vorpal sword. Because they wanted a Vorpal sword. And the DM said, well, I hadn't planned on putting Vorpal weapons in this game. But if you want them, that's fine. But if you get them, the bad guys can get them too. So you decide. And they decided they wanted that Vorpal sword. And then a few games later, they faced off against someone with a Vorpal sword, and somebody in the party lost their head.
Yep.
And then everybody was pissed at Mr. I have to have my Vorpal sword. So.
Sorry.
Yeah. Can definitely come back and haunt you.
Literally.
Yeah. Now, what do you usually choose, going back to where we started, what do you usually choose as your stat rolling method? Like, what's the one you use the most?
Well, in the past, the one I have used the most was the the 46 re-rolling ones and twos, because I generally would run higher level campaign or higher powered campaigns.
Right.
Here's a word of caution to anyone who might be listening to this and may think, well, maybe I'll give it a try. Here's the problem that I ran into using that system is when you start a new campaign and you decide, well, I don't want quite as powerful of a campaign, so you have everybody roll, the 4 dice 6, re-roll the lowest, or even the 3 dice 6 system. The kickback you get from your old players,
yeah,
is immense, Pam.
Yep.
Yeah, they just don't like doing that because they want those. They're used to those high stats, but so yeah, that's probably my most used system.
Yeah. I can't recall a time that I ever actually chose the power level for a game. I would always just kind of, see where it went. Like what they were interested in, what they were doing. The one thing I found was that groups pretty much name themselves by their behavior.
Right.
Like, I had a group that made a name for themselves because they slew a young white dragon. And decided that they were going to make armor out of it.
Oh, yes.
And started calling themselves...
That sounds like a great idea.
Yeah.
But...
They started calling themselves the Band of the White Death. And it was only later that they discovered the irony of those words when a very, very old white dragon killed a couple of them.
Mm-hmm.
You're wearing my kin. Die.
And boasting about it.
Yeah, yeah. There was another group that, for whatever reason, whenever they would get in a fight in a structure made of wood, they would end up setting it on fire. Oftentimes burning it down. Not
Uh-huh.
deliberately and not out of stupidity, but it just kept happening. Because they would make just the wrong roll at the wrong time and set something very flammable on fire, and it would catch other stuff, and they're in the middle of a fight, so they're not paying attention to it, and they became known as the Band of the Burning Ember.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Um,
They weren't thrilled with that name, but
hey, quit using fire.
cold. Cold doesn't destroy buildings usually.
Mm-hmm. Um, but yeah, I found that in fifth edition, um, sticking with more moderate stats works better if you want to play if you want to pull out just the straight monsters for encounters out of the monster manual.
Mm-hmm.
If you have more hefty stats, I found that players easily overpower the monsters straight from the book. But I'm quite adept and accustomed to modifying things on the fly, so giving monsters extra hit points, an extra ability, uh, whatever, higher armor class.
Mm-hmm.
Cool, no problem. And just do it until one of the characters almost dies, and you're like, okay, I think we got it.
Right. Right.
But the other issue here, another house rules thing, sort of. When you have a group of players in your game who have played Dungeons and Dragons as we have for decades,
Yeah.
pulling things straight from the monster manual doesn't leave a lot of room for surprise. And while most of my players are pretty good, you still have they have the knee-jerk reaction to meta. If you run against a hydra, don't cut off its head.
Right.
So you gotta. So I enjoy either A, modifying the monsters, or B, making up my very own monsters and throwing it at them, simply to terrorize them. So in that regard, technically it's not a house rule, but it is sort of modifying the game.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
But there are times like that where you kind of have to. Unless you can find new ways to use old monsters to pick on your players. And there are certainly monsters who can do that.
Yeah. I found that, especially when writing a Cathan, you and the others haven't actually encountered any orcs yet. But they're not going to be typical out of the book orcs.
Mm-hmm.
Because in this world, they're a little bit more like Tolkien orcs.
Right.
They're nasty.
Like Urukai.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, even just the grunt level are still, well, they're more fierce in some slightly different ways.
Well, that's the beauty of making your own world, is you can make these things however you want. I've done the same thing in mine, where the orcs are different on a lot of levels. They're more akin to barbarian clans for the most part,
Yeah.
um, and have access to any and all um, uh, alignments. You know, they're not all necessarily evil. There are evil orcs, just like there are evil humans and elves or whatever. But by and large, they're pretty much uh, barbarian clans. They live in different parts of the world. Mostly in my world, they lived in the further north. But just something to put a twist on the stereotypes of different races, which is kind of the trend in D&D now anyway. But um, I just thought that might be something new. It's how I handled the Drow in mine,
Mm-hmm.
the Dark Elves, because none of them, the society as a whole, aren't evil. They're not evil. And some of them live on the surface. Some live in the dark realms. And the deity they worship is the goddess of knowledge and wisdom and technology. And that's what their culture and society revolves around. They're the most renowned engineers and scientists in all of the realms, and that's what they're known for. So yeah, I just wanted to do something. I didn't want to go tropey and cliche with some of the races. So that's another thing I did to modify my game.
Yeah, I when I was writing a Cathan, I decided pretty quickly that I was going to do away with all of the traditional race relations
Mm-hmm.
between the different player races and do it more, really more along the lines of, what you see, I guess, in the real world, is that you see some people who just have an unreasoning hatred of other types of people.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that, type is based on religion or species or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
There are some people out there who think those people are evil and they should all be killed.
Yep.
But it's individuals. It's not a racial trait.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I wanted to ask you about: have you ever added like a new mechanic to an existing game? Like I remember when 3rd edition came out, that was right around the time that everybody started posting their house rules and their homebrews and stuff online and just sharing it out. And I remember seeing, all different types of magic systems, like, geomancy and chronomancy and stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that. Have you ever added something like that to an existing system? And if so, how did you figure out how to balance it?
Well, let me answer the second question first. There's only one way to figure out how to balance something like that, and that's to play it,
Yeah.
run it, and test it, play test it, see how it does. Um, and I will say this as well: you will invariably, always, have to modify it and remodify it and hone it down to a functional system. But I have to go back to villains and vigilantes is probably um, restructuring the superpowers. Uh, but well, I know one rule that I constructed just for a means of helping to get a grasp of things is I came up with the knockback system.
Oh yeah.
Um, that didn't really mean much other than if you were dealing with super strength characters or high powered energy blast type characters, um, it can remove your character from the battle, and you
Yeah.
have to spend time getting back to it. But yeah, I devised a formula for how much damage you took based on how much body mass you had and resistance to the damage you had, um, to determine how far back you were knocked away. And it added another level to the game, I think, especially if you're dealing with super strength characters or something like that. Because now you're getting into the collateral damage thing. Because when you're flying back, you have no control over your momentum.
Right.
You fly back as far as you fly back. That's how it goes. And if there's anything behind you within that space, you either fly into it or fly through it. And which for characters who weren't invulnerable was another extra bonus damage you took because you slammed into the wall or whatever.
Yep.
Um, so that was a mechanic I added, I think. Yeah, which is pretty cool. I liked it.
Yeah. I have something brewing for a Cathin. Hasn't
Yeah.
hasn't officially made an appearance yet. Probably won't for a little while yet, but it's something that I've not seen in really any system before. I'm kind of excited about it.
Cool.
But it's definitely going to change the game a little.
So, well, we'll see how that works out.
Yeah.
So we've talked about all the stuff we've changed. Is there anything that you just loved?
Oh, yes.
Any system or mechanic or anything that you absolutely love?
Yes. And it's from 5th edition. When I first read it, I was part of the last round of playtesting for 5th edition. So I got my hands on the rules and read through them, and I hit this mechanic and just went, "Oh, that's bloody brilliant. Why didn't any of us ever think of that?" The advantage
I know what you're going to
disadvantage
say
system.
because it's mine.
Yeah.
The what?
The advantage disadvantage system. Oh
So
my god. So
that
simple.
was mine.
And yet so so brilliant, you know? It takes into account aptitude. It takes
Yes.
into account situational modifiers.
Yes.
And
Yep.
it instead of doing it by the DC you assign someone, you actually put it in the hands of the player.
Right. Or the dice in this case.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But yeah, that was a game changer for me. I mean, I'm all
Yeah,
for adding that mechanic to every game I play ever.
Agreed.
Period.
Agreed.
You
Yep.
know,
By far my favorite mechanic.
I keep teasing the guy who's running our 3rd edition game at the moment. I'm like, "Can I roll with advantage?" He's like, "We don't have advantage in 3rd edition." I'm like, "We could."
Yeah. True.
But so far, I have not yet been able to persuade him.
Um, a system that I was looking at modifying in fifth edition was, you get proficiencies
Yep.
for skills. And I thought, it just makes sense that if you get good enough at doing a skill, you should pretty much have a baseline of proficiency in it where you just, you never fail if it's at this difficulty level.
I think that's already
Uh,
there.
uh, that's what I was going to say. It's not there for every character. It's there for rogues.
Oh,
At
okay.
11th level, they get the ability with any skill they're proficient in, they can't roll lower than a 10. If they roll a 9 or less, it automatically goes to a 10 roll.
Hmm.
And they add their modifiers.
Well, you could make it a feat,
Yeah, I suppose, but
and then
because the rogues have that, it's something inherent for that class. I'm inclined to leave it the way it is,
hmm.
because rogues are skill monkeys. That's just what they do. They
Right.
um,
Well, you could always
can
make a
do.
feat that was a lower powered version of it.
Yeah,
Like a simple check is a 5.
right,
So you could make a feat that says, any roll lower than a 5 is automatically adjusted to a 5.
right,
So for anything that's a simple check, they will succeed.
right,
And that might actually even remove some dice rolling, because if you know the DC for this is 5 and that character has that feat, you could just say, yeah, you do it. You don't even need to roll,
right.
because
Well,
you
that
know
kind of
the
goes to the mechanic they accounted for with the what's it called, oh, man, my brain today.
Yep. Old GMs,
Pass,
folks.
the passive skills.
Oh, yeah, passive. Yeah.
That's sort of what that does. So I think that they even account for that in some small way.
Oh,
Uh,
there you go. Make a feat that allows someone to gain a passive skill check in a
gotcha.
skill they're proficient with. So, if you've got somebody who's got, plus 10 persuasion, and they take the feat, anytime they get in a situation where they're trying to be persuasive, if the DC they need is 10 or lower, they automatically succeed.
There you go, folks. We just made a new game mechanic right on the fly here.
Yeah. And that one
Yeah,
won't
that's pretty good.
get overpowered because it's a feat. So I mean,
Right.
if you choose to take that every level, you're sacrificing all the other feats and all the stat increases and
Right. Yeah. And I think that's keeps the rogue ability in check, where it's still, because with the rogues, it's all of their skills that they're proficient in.
Yep.
Get that, you know,
Yep.
and it's 10. It's automatically a 10 plus your modifiers, And so by 11th level, a rogue's skill modifiers and their proficiency, they're rolling high regardless of what they roll on the dice. It's going
Yeah.
to be a good roll.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, the feat could be that it's 1 plus your skill modifier, and that's considered a passive level in that skill for you.
Yeah, so I've got some fun plans for Airman. Once he gets to that level, it's going to be interesting. But Any other things that work? I can tell you this with villains and vigilantes, going back to that, something that I think is brilliant is that I have never changed in all of the years. It's just one of the, and that was the calculation for determining carrying capacity because it takes more into consideration than just your strength.
Yep.
It takes your strength, it takes your
Endurance
endurance,
and your
and it
weight.
takes your body mass.
Yeah.
Yes. Um, it, Perfect. For sure, physical strength, that's perfect. And that's one thing that I always kept. I always liked that.
I'll tell you one of the other mechanics in fifth that I like. It's not new, but sort of how they're addressing it is, and that's the idea that every wizard chooses a school to specialize in, and that they've laid out very carefully. Here are the different damage types that
Hmm.
magic can produce, or that attacks can produce. I was working up a new monster for Ecathan and realized that they were their special attack was creating a type of energy that didn't actually have anything equivalent in the structure. So I was forced to kind of think, okay, do I want to add a new damage type? But considering all the spells and things that give you resistances to certain damage types, that would mean reworking a lot of spells.
Right.
Or do I just want to say it's this type of energy, but the effect is equivalent to this existing damage type? And that's what I ended up going with.
Right. Um, One final thing, because it's getting late here.
Yep.
Rule that I really, really like that is a mechanic in the fifth edition vampire game, which is a severe upgrade from the older editions. And that is when you use a discipline, say you want to use dominate, you know, against another kindred, for example,
Mm-hmm.
you do it automatically, and the kindred gets a resistance to it based on his, the abilities they have. But against a human, there's no. It just works automatically. But the price is you have to make uh, a blood die roll. And if you fail the blood die roll, you get a point of hunger. And the thing with hunger is that if you get down to 5 hunger die or hunger points, you frenzy.
Hmm.
So, which is a place you don't want to be.
No.
So it was a really good mechanic because it gives you the opportunity to use them relatively carefree, but it comes with a price, a cost, and you have to make and to see if it does. And there's a chance that you're fine and it doesn't cost you anything, but there's a possibility it does. And if those hunger dice get down to 3 and 4, you start looking, whether you want to or not, you start looking for a way to replenish that blood. You are severely tempted. You know,
Yep.
it becomes voracious. And of course, if you hit 5, you do get it by any means necessary,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of the masquerade or anything else.
which can be very bad.
It can indeed in the long term.
Yep. All right, well, I hope this was interesting, maybe helpful. I don't know, I'm thinking of trying to write up that feat.
Yeah.
And add it to a Cathan and,
Mm-hmm.
see how it goes. That it would be the first new feat in that world. I haven't even started on those.
Well, D&D Beyond has ways to create your own whatever you want.
Yep. Yep.
So,
Yep. Oh yeah, I've already played with that. To give the in Icathan, clerics and paladins of specific deities get bonus spells.
mm-hmm.
They get a bonus cantrip and they get a bonus second or third level spell.
Mm-hmm.
That's always part of their repertoire. They don't need to memorize it. It's always available to them if they want to cast it.
Right.
But
Yep.
the easiest way I found to add that to characters was to simply make it a feat.
Yep. Yeah, I like how they do that in 5e2. They, depending on what you play, depending on what race, there's different things. Like, with airmen, with elves, they get either a martial weapon skill that's pretty significant, or they can take one cantrip, which is what I ended up doing. That's how he has Mage Hand.
Right.
So, and it's just a class or a racial feature, racial trait. So,
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. All right, so yeah, hopefully this was helpful and interesting. We will be back tonight, 7 o'clock Eastern U.S. time on Wednesdays. We play Star Wars: The Old Republic, and we're playing Sith side. So
Yep.
if you're looking for Fuzzy Bunny gameplay, don't watch us,
no,
because that's not what you're going to get.
no.
And
if you want to look in and watch somebody chop up other characters, then that's where you want to be, because that's what we'll be doing.
yeah. If you want to see a bounty hunter who is absolutely in love with that one death from above skill,
Yeah.
tune in.
Gnarly AoE.
I love that. It's the only time you really get to use the jetpack.
True.
So yeah, I remember the first time playing through with the bounty hunter, I fell in love with that one.
Mm-hmm.
And do check our website, artifactsworldwide.com. Lots of information there about the Lands of Icathan game. Our weekly schedule is there, and links to all of our social media are there as well. Feel free to reach out if you have questions or suggestions for topics for this show. We'd love to hear them.
Yeah, please like, share, and subscribe. The drill. We really like to see feedback, whether it's YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, whatever. We all have our own Twitters and Instagram. So yeah, please comment. Whatever. We like to hear something back from somebody. So.
Yep. All right. So until next week, remember, follow the rules unless they don't work for you.
Right.
And then make your own.
Easy peasy.
Easy peasy. We'll talk to you next week.
See ya.